I know I've talked about this a lot recently, but this one was just like, I got to hit this one again. So there's an article that I read this week that is talking about how there's a growing number of CEOs that are literally forcing return to office at all costs. And Amazon, I think, is the one in the news most notably right now, where it's like literally employees are protesting and rioting over this. And Amazon's like, tough. What's sad is in the article I read, it references it's out of there's a survey out of KPMG that it references. And I dug into the survey, and one of the things that was interesting, honestly sad about the survey is 90%, 89 technically, of CEOs just openly acknowledged that they had no issue with, were totally fine with, and actually were planning on dangling incentives and basically trying to manipulate people and treat people differently, like just to get them to come into the office, which is really, really yucky to me. This may be a silly word to use for it, but I'm like, that's not cool. And this whole thing of return to office, can we just acknowledge this feels like an elementary school tantrum that's happening, right? We have moved completely away from what is best for the customer, what is best for the employee, what is best for the company. It literally now is nothing more than a middle school tantrum. Not even middle school. I'm not even going to say middle school. Some of this stuff, it's like my 4-year-olds don't throw tantrums like this. We're just totally willing to treat people like this and brag about it. It's just tragic. And I talked about this. And if you think, oh, Christopher, this is just you talking about return to office, it's actually not, because it's actually much bigger than just returning to office. I'm seeing this trend with a lot of my industry folks in a lot of different areas that have been historically considered, human centric. Okay. So learning and development, if you know me, that's my background. Learning and development, culture, is another big one in organizations. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, benefits. So you want to say, well, those are all squishy ones. Like benefits are another area. A lot of these things in organizations where companies historically have said, this is how we show that we care about our people. There's this big pullback. And it's not even like a slow pullback. It's like whiplash, where a lot of these organizations in the early COVID years were like recognizing, oh my gosh, we're going to lose all our people. Like, this is serious for us. The market was great for job seekers. So if you didn't treat your employees great, they'd just go get another job. No big deal. And so companies went big on employee centricity. And it was like, yeah, work from anywhere. And we're going to have the best benefits. We're going to have the best pay. We're going to have culture. We're going to invest in DEI and really make this an inclusive workspace. And it was headlined and plastered all over organizations. And what we're seeing right now is the market has shifted to the organizations having more power than the job market or than the job seekers. And as a result, it's really tragic to me seeing companies going, yeah, you know what, this whole like employee centricity thing, that was a trend. It was cool for a bit when we needed to kind of like gaslight employees into coming to work for us. But now we don't need that anymore. So we don't really need to care about how we treat them. And I mean, some of the statements I've seen made by CEOs and leaders of like, fine, they don't like it, get out of here. We'll find somebody who does. We're going backwards in terms of progress and how we're thinking about work. And it's part of the reason why when I think about what do I want to do next, I've had some interviews over the past few weeks where I'm like, I'd rather be broke and have my family live in, we'll set up a tent in the middle of somewhere and live in that versus have to go work for some of these organizations. And so my message is to job seekers, listen, like I get we are all in different spots and sometimes we just got to put up with some of this stuff. And to be fair, okay, to be fair to the companies, I think many companies way over indexed on silly, nonsensical, human centric things in their organization when they thought they had to compete for talent, and they way overspent on things that showed no demonstrable value, that really weren't things that they needed to do. I firmly believe that. I actually have a guest coming on the show. He's a former engineer who got into the DEI space and looked at the DEI space and was kind of like, what is this? It's going to be a really interesting conversation. But there's lots of things. Learning. I mean, I saw companies throwing millions of dollars at L&D, and I'm in that industry and I watched the industry squander it. I saw the same thing with culture and all this stuff where it was like, what are you doing? You're throwing money at things that are not even what people need. So I get where in some ways companies have to kind of pull back and go, dude, we spent all this cash on this and we can't afford to do this forever. And it didn't show any real tangible benefit. Saw the same thing with salaries. Salaries just went through the roof in COVID years. And a lot of companies got to a point where they couldn't even hardly afford to pay the people they had. And I warned people, hey, if you're making 200 grand as an entry level recruiter, don't buy a house on that salary because it's not going to last. And sure enough, companies are resetting. And I think some of that is natural. What's frustrating and hard for me to watch is this just, we refuse to meet in the middle. And I just don't understand it. And when I talk to exec leaders, I really am trying to do more to help influence. Hey, you don't need to snap back to over here. Like, okay, yes, let me help you understand where you over indexed. Let me help you think about the areas where, that probably wasn't the wisest investment here. And maybe you do need to rethink some of these things. Maybe you need to dial it back in these areas. And maybe you are over invested in office real estate and you need to do something with the space. I get it. That's probably one of the biggest things that is not discussed enough is the fact that, yeah, a lot of these companies are in over their head in commercial real estate. But rather than throwing a tantrum and forcing people into offices just so you can feel better about it, because the leasing company gave you a credit if you can get people X number of employees back into the office, which, by the way, these are deals that are happening all the time. The leasing companies are nervous about renewals, so they're giving discounts to companies on the promise that they get enough people back in because they know if there's enough people in the office, they'll renew their contracts. This kind of stuff is happening all over. And I feel like there's just so much effort to fight against each other and come up with the best Band-Aid solution instead of going, let's rethink this stuff. Like if you're over indexed on commercial real estate, then let's acknowledge that as a problem. I worked with one organization where we just tackled that one straight on. And we said, okay, then what do we do with this space? Because forcing everybody to come into the office is going to cause damage. Let's figure out what kind of office space we really need. And then how much of that do we not need? And if we can't work something out with the leasing company, maybe let's figure out something that's mutually beneficial for the organization, the local community, your tax write-off. And we were able to figure it out. Like there are solutions to these problems. We don't need to act like children fighting over boo, return to office. Yay, return to office. It's like, well, let's just talk about what we really need to do and let's come to a solution here because there are solutions. And to the people who are feeling the pain of this, I won't mention where, but there's some organizations I know of right now who they have gone big time on this. And literally people are quitting with no jobs. And so if you're a leader that thinks you can just do this to people and it won't hurt you, first of all, one, get out of leadership. You don't belong there. People are human beings. They deserve dignity and respect, and you cannot treat them like this. But it will come back to burn you. And I know of a couple organizations right now that thought this is never going to hurt us. We'll hide it. We'll glaze the glass door reviews, create a bunch of fake ones to try and bump up our scores. We'll try and contain all these issues and try and gaslight employees into making them think it's their fault. And it's killing them. Their people are leaving. Word is getting out about what they're like. And they're struggling to recover and their business is suffering big time. So you may think you're never going to feel it, but you will. And that's just my caution if you're in that seat. If you're in the employee seat where you're struggling with this, I feel for you right now. And if there are things I can do, let me know. If I can help make connections, I'm trying to do things to help encourage organizations to think differently. also building a list of organizations. Dropbox and Spotify are two organizations I highly regard right now who are really bucking the trend, specifically in the return to workspace, but in some other areas as well. So, anyway, I won't keep going on this one because it's frustrating, but I would just say there are ways to solve these problems. We don't need to operate the way we are right now. And it's really unfortunate that we are. And it's going to cost everybody in the long run. The reality is, when we raise the tide, everybody wins. This isn't a zero sum game. So we need to stop treating it like it is.